Hello again. Well, this week's search is looking at television. An awful lot is said by adults about the effects that television have on children. So we thought it was high time that the children themselves were given the chance to say what they think about television. So here with me, some children.
Since television began in the 1940s, its effect on children has been cause for debate. And nowhere more so than in the area of children's news.
I can't think there's anything more important than getting children interested in the really important things that are happening in the world into which they're growing up.
For 30 years, the BBC's flagship programme, Newsround, has reflected the huge changes in the way our society perceives and treats children. But today, when television news has never been more important in an adult world, it's the one genre of children's programming on the decline.
There's no other programme like it. It's Nick News and you're on it.
I don't think that people attend to the potential of children's news anything like enough, and I'm not asking for something that's kind of ghettoised, because I think children anyway are conscious of news, and they ask very potent questions.
How are children supposed to behave as citizens if no one explains to them what is going on in their society?
Here's the news. Another action-filled adventure.
Hello everyone, I'm Jennifer Gay, one of the Children's Hour announcers. For the next few minutes, I'd like you to see some of the children's programmes.
From its earliest days, the BBC was committed to delivering news for a children's audience. But in keeping with general perceptions of the time, its daily children's newsreel presented a rose-tinted image of childhood. Jolly Hockey Sticks meets Famous Five.
Most of our programmes come from the studio, but our outside broadcast people give us plenty of shows as well. We've been to the Tower of London, the zoo, a farm, and lots more interesting places. We see plenty of films as well. On Mondays we show an adventure film, and twice a week we have our own children's newsreel.
If you play cricket, you'll know quite well that there's only one kind of wood from which bats can be made: willow trees. And very special and carefully grown trees they have to be too.
The short films were delivered in the manner of a pleasant old teacher telling children about the things they thought they should know. Stories a long way from the political issues of the day.
How would you like one of these for a pet? It's a golden hamster, a sort of large fat mouse with beautiful golden brown hair and no tail. One very strange thing about them is that in their wild state they are found at only one place in the world, Aleppo, in northwest Syria near the Turkish border.
Children's newsreels were absolutely excruciatingly boring and naff, and little kittens and little chickens, and I mean just really dreadful, and I think very much a remote adult's view of what children wanted.
Bobby Logan, only 2.5 years old, is the youngest golfer in the world, and just like father, carries his own clubs round the golf links at Rhyl, North Wales, where he lives. Of course, his clubs are a bit smaller.
The style was different. The King's English was different. There were no regional accents. They seemed to have been forbidden. And of course the technology was totally different, so everything seems slightly patronising and slightly arch and rather jokey in a way that wasn't at all intended, and terribly, terribly slow.
This is the BBC television service. Today's broadcast for schools is the third in the series Transport and Communication. Now, here's Arthur Garrett.
Well, this is a programme about the history of the motor car. And as you see, I'm seated in a motor car now. And you may think this is a funny old crock, but this was a motor car which actually made history. It was the first motor car which was mass-produced.
In the early 1960s, the BBC children's schedules came under fierce competition from ITV. The BBC's response was to ditch children's newsreels and create a new generation of more entertainment-based programming.
Switch your way if you choose. Go in search of the blues. But go now if you're going, 'cause we're showing a whole scene going on. If you're tempted to stay,
the BBC's output as a whole had started to embrace the growing 60s youth culture and give young people a voice for the first time. It was no surprise that by the end of the decade, their younger brothers and sisters wanted to have their say too.
There was a whole push towards more relevant and contemporary ways of approaching children's programming, and there was a lot of quite realistic drama began, obviously lots of classic books and costume drama and the sort of safe, worthy stuff. But at that point, I think the change began towards showing children in more realistic and contemporary ways.
One of the first programmes to let children speak for themselves was Search. Search not only took on the issues of the day in child-sized bites, it also launched the daddy of children's current affairs.
Today we're searching into the environment. The word environment has become very popular over the past few years.
Well, I got into children's television purely by accident. It was never intended. I was working on Points West, the regional television news bulletin in Bristol, and I went into the studio one afternoon to record a commentary for something I was doing that night, and there's a lot of strange faces there, and I said, what's going on? And they said, oh, we're doing auditions for a new children's programme called Search, which will be a current affairs programme for children. So I said, well, that sounds interesting. Can I have a go? And so I did it, and I never thought any more about it. I went off and did that night's Points West, and a week or so later I got a phone call saying, would you like to present Search? We'd liked your audition and we'd like to offer you the job.
Yeah, and if you were in charge of children's programmes, what kind of changes would you make, if any?
Mostly children instead of adults.
You'd want more children involved in programmes?
The adults are taking over the world.
So would you prefer Paul sitting in this seat
Yes.
to me?
Yes. Yes.
Oh.
In the Stoke Newington area of North London, there's much more than litter worrying Joseph Christian. He's concerned about man's basic need, housing.
Where I live, it's dusty, because they've got half the street pulled down, because more houses are going down than there are being built. Bulldozers just come and pull them down just because they're too old. That doesn't matter, they can patch them up. They got the builders to do it, patch them up.
Well, Search was a programme which introduced topics which were of relevance to children and used children and put children on screen, which again hadn't been done very much in the past. It isn't always successful, but it is important if children are to relate to news, documentary, factual programming, that they see it as being relevant to themselves.
What do you all feel about violence early on in the evening on television?
I don't think they ought to show what's happening in other places, what's happened to the people, you know, that's broken their leg and got the body inside out. I don't think it's very nice for children to see, because at night when they go to bed, they might have dreams and frighten them, you know.
I think we were one of the first programmes to take children's opinions seriously. It wasn't a question of us telling them something. They were telling us something. They were telling us what they felt about current issues and also about social issues.
I've been just doing something quite recently during children's programmes, which has been quite new. It's been a news programme made specially for children.
First on BBC One, John Craven's News Round.
Until the creation of Newsround, real news had been missing from the BBC's children's output.
Hello, and there's good news tonight for Tom and Jerry fans. An MP has called off his campaign to get the world-famous cartoon series banned. And the reason he's changed his mind? A huge protest from children.
I wanted children to be able to come home from school, be entertained, to relax, and at the same time to have programmes that would stretch them a bit.
She wrote a policy statement saying that BBC children's programmes did every kind of programme that happened in mainstream television, with the exception of news. And then just went on. And I thought, I wonder why not news? And I wonder if there's any way of doing news for children.
It so happened that there was a gap in the schedules twice a week. I think they'd brought in some American programmes which run shorter than British programmes, so they had 7 or 8 minutes to fill. And so Edward Barnes, who was then the deputy head of children's television, and his friend Derek Amor, who was the editor of television news between them, said, well, let's do a news programme for children.
Newsround, the world's first news programme for children, was a mini version of the adult evening news. It first aired in 1972 with an item on the decline in the number of ospreys.
Well, on the very first day of Newsround, there were only 3 of us on the editorial team. None of us knew our way around Television Centre, which of course is a circular building, so we kept going round and round. We got totally lost. I got to the studio with just a few minutes to go before transmission. And luckily we had an old-time television news director in charge of the gallery. And with 2 minutes to go, he said, I better do a script check. I don't have the lead story. I don't have the second story. I have the third story. I don't have the fourth story. I have the 5th story, but I don't have the last story. So everybody say after me, Our Father, which art in... And somehow he must have been listening because everything arrived and the programme went out smoothly.
Now the latest news on the Apollo 17 astronauts, and it's that they're speeding towards the moon at 24,000 miles an hour, 2.5 hours behind schedule.
Little did I realise at the time that, not only was he a terrific presenter, and not only did he understand exactly what we were doing, but without him I'd have been totally sunk because I didn't know anything about making news programmes at all.
The Newsround team quickly found their niche, utilising the considerable resources of the BBC's main adult news.
There was no television news programme before 6 o'clock in the evening. And so there were a lot of people standing by to do bulletins on BBC One and BBC Two with nothing much to do around about 5 o'clock. And so we got an expensive operation, really, for next to nothing. And it was amazing. It was just for an experiment, of course. It was for 6 weeks.
Today, the Union of Muslim Organisations sent plans to the government to show how they'd like to run the schools. Lucy Martham reports.
The great thing was he wasn't to wear a jacket, and he was to sit in front of the desk, which was also a great problem because he got nowhere to put his papers.
What we're missing. No page 5.
But it was the thing of not having this thing in front of him that was going to that was going to be a barrier between him and the children.
I didn't appear to be like a teacher. The children had just got home from school. They were entitled to flop in front of TV and relax, and I didn't want them to feel they were back at school again.
Today, the tale of the runaway cow that's been causing quite a commotion. The cow decided to resist arrest and leapt into the air and over the bonnet of the police car. Well, I'm told that the cow was finally caught, but the car was dented. It seems that the cow was on her way to market, so maybe she knew that there was quite a lot at stake. Well, that's all today. See you again on Monday. Until then, bye-bye.
Nationally known news correspondents and reporters were also persuaded to file stories for Newsround.
It's not like normal hovercraft, which use noisy propellers to drive themselves along. Instead, this one has got 2 giant fans. They're down these 2 holes here.
When I was a reporter, indeed when I was a foreign correspondent, I used to do pieces for what was then John Craven's Newsround. For lots of reasons, really. John Craven was an old mate, that was one reason. There was a very attractive girl who was editing John Craven's Newsround, which might well have been another reason, in a very academic way, of course. But the main reason was I had 2 kids who watched Newsround.
And the idea is that the fans suck in air. Some of it they blow out underneath to lift it up, and the rest they blow out the back to drive it along.
But it was tough. It was very tough. They had a far higher threshold of acceptance, far more hands-on than ever any of the so-called grown-up news programmes ever had. Made you do it more often, made you rewrite stuff more often. It was really, really tough. It was very much tougher than working for the 9 o'clock news of its day.
You would sit down with all the information you could possibly muster, all the visuals, all the facts, and then you'd sit back and think, I am 9 years old. How am I going to understand all this?
You had to be simple without being simplistic. You had to make it clear without being patronising, and they were terribly worried about that you shouldn't be patronising. And you had to sort of be informative without being didactic. It was quite extraordinarily difficult because you think you know all about whatever it was, North Sea oil I was doing at one stage, and then when you've got to come at that story anew and in a relatively short period of time lay it out, but without glossing over the complications, without talking down to the kids, it's an amazing exercise and actually really very useful. More journalists ought to do it.
Newsround was soon appearing every weekday night, with John Craven introducing a more relaxed style of presentation to the staid world of news, including the "And Finally" story.
And finally tonight, reports from America say the freezing weather there has brought an unexpected problem to the White House, home of the president. It's been invaded by mice. An army of them has taken up residence there, and some have even got into the Oval Office where President Reagan has his desk. Officials say it could be very embarrassing if they pop up while he's having vital meetings. But at least his secrets would be safe. They'd be as quiet as mice. And that's all tonight. See you tomorrow. Bye for now.
Newsround was and is, and I hope always will be, the bit of grit in children's programming.
3, 2, 1.
And up we go. Thank you very much.
On film for 30 seconds.
Meanwhile, the BBC's most popular children's programme, Blue Peter, was using its documentary inserts and charity appeals to bring global issues and international news stories to British children.
But if I happen to take 2 steps back, I'll be treading in a stream of lava that's just come out of this volcano today, and there it is. It's sweeping down. I can hardly face it because it's so hot.
The heat was terrific. If I took 1 step nearer, I could feel my eyebrows starting to singe.
I'm going to try a couple of experiments up here. I've got some paper in a cardboard box. Put those in the middle. There you are. That shows just how hot it is.
Presenting the sort of documentary items on the programme and the historical items on the programme and the environmental items on the programme was very, very difficult because, of course, children see things totally in black and white. They don't understand the shades of grey. It's goodies and baddies, and there's nothing in between. And that means that you have to pay particular attention to the language that you use and the way you put the problems or the ideas over, again, without emasculating the object of the exercise. And of course, they are besotted with fairness. It's not fair. It's not fair. You have to palpably show that you're being fair.
Blue Peter's a relentlessly comfortable programme, I think. I think for children all over the UK, it's really valuable to have something in their lives which is comfortable, whatever their circumstances. And so what we've tried to do on Blue Peter is reflect the world that children live in, but maybe there are some subjects and some issues that we steer clear of. We think our brief on Blue Peter is to offer children a window on the world.
And by the end of the 70s, Blue Peter's window on the world inevitably began to reflect more complex issues than natural wonders.
Simon Groom was the first presenter to report from Phnom Penh since John Pilger had left before Pol Pot's takeover, and that was very, very exciting, and it was a tremendous scoop.
Malcolm took me to an orphanage where there were 530 children whose parents had either been killed or simply disappeared during the last few years. And after what they've been through, it was amazing the way they greeted us. These children are the lucky ones. In Phnom Penh, they're getting food, and Malcolm told me that although they're not yet 100% fit, they're well on the way back to good health. He said that things weren't as good in the outlying villages. Rice, the basic food, is still scarce. By now, hopefully, our trucks are being used to get supplies out into the villages to help the people get over their immediate survival problems.
When the BBC entered the ratings war for the Saturday morning children's audience with Swap Shop, news was considered crucial to its distinctiveness, and John Craven was brought in as part of the package.
You read it. All right. Could you please tell me if it's true that John Craven wears a hairpiece, as I've heard many rumours about it?
First, the idea was that I would have my own little news desk away from all the silliness. And that lasted for about 3 weeks.
Don't actually do anything with it, you just let us have a listen. Open your mouth. It does the door, doesn't it? Thank you. We tried it on a pigeon and it died, but...
And I got involved in some of the silliness as well, but we always did the serious bits, you know. And there were some epic moments, like, of course, Margaret Thatcher.
Hello, Alison.
Hello. In the event of a nuclear war, where will you be?
Oh, my goodness me.
I think the politicians agreed to come on these programmes because they did see in the children the voters of tomorrow. And also because it was a new area for them, I think, you know, a new challenge, really. They were used to the likes of Robin Day and Jeremy Paxman firing questions at them, but, you know, an 11-year-old, they discovered, could be just as forceful.
I should be in London.
Oh, don't you have your own bunker or something?
Look, dear.
But also they had all the fun as well. Mrs. Thatcher could help pick her favourite new singles and things like that, you know. Where else can she be seen doing that?
What's the matter?
There's a smell, miss.
Yes, what is it?
It smells like somebody's old.
By the 1980s, other children's programmes were beginning to present heavyweight issues like drugs, sex and bullying in a way their audience could understand.
Can't you talk?
Yeah.
Sir? Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
That's better.
There was a whole package of children's programming then which broke away from this formal, polite, rather paternalistic way of addressing children and began to address them, as with Newsround, as serious people who could be interested in the issues of the day, and then with Grange Hill and other sorts of drama, addressing them by showing them themselves, showing them children on screen like themselves.
Where is it then?
Where's what?
Your money.
What for?
Cher, don't get hurt, son. That's what for.
I'm not giving you my money. Ah, get off, it hurts.
I did tell you.
20.
That all you got?
That's all I got.
Every Monday you come looking for me, right? With your 20p. Right? And you tell anyone, and I'll put you in a wheelchair.
Children's programmes like Byker Grove and Grange Hill cover quite tough topics, and clearly that influences the kind of children's arena and what children expect at certain times on children's television. It's become acceptable that children's programmes should challenge the audience with tricky stories and help them think their way through those stories.
You know, children are capable of accepting the fact that some issues are a matter of weighing things up. There is a real danger that you just do the fluffy bunny stories, or you do the environmental stories. And you do the environmental stories in what I think is a criminal way by portraying them as if this is a simple black and white issue of good and evil, when in so many environmental stories it's a matter of the trade-offs of different interest groups, which is why the idea of doing environmental stories and painting all the environmentalists as saints and all the people who want to build a factory as complete sinners is so tempting, but so, to my mind, criminally irresponsible.
All over the world, brightly coloured coral is sold as souvenirs. Much of it's been deliberately hacked off the reef by divers. Some types of coral are already protected by law and can only be sold with special permission. Countries like the Philippines have banned the sale of their coral completely. But even some of that has found its way into Britain. Marine expert Elizabeth Wood wants to stop the destruction before it's too late.
We're trying to get all the corals listed as endangered species. At the moment, some of them are endangered. For example, that one is, that one isn't. The other thing that we want to do is actually to persuade people not to buy shells and corals anyway, even if they are legally imported.
Environmental stories always have a place in children's news, but stories of violence are more difficult to interpret to youngsters.
There were some stories that were too horrific to tell. One of them was a child who had been missing and was found strangled by a piece of piano wire in a drain. And there's no way you can put a positive angle on that, so you just didn't do it. I mean, some things you just didn't do.
I think the amazing thing is that kind of 50 years into television news, we still really have very little idea of what the true effect of raw, real information is on children.
They're exposed to news much, much more than they used to be in any case. They're exposed to it on the radio and in papers, and they're talking about news stories, and big and quite difficult news stories sometimes, in the playground a lot. So I think what is really important for us to do is to put those stories, and sometimes those very difficult stories, into context for them, to be reassuring when we can, but to tell it like it is as well.
In 1989, many children were among those who died in the Hillsborough football tragedy. The circumstances surrounding their deaths left many questions which needed answers.
Standing here, it's hard to understand how such a thing could have happened. All around me, there's a great feeling of sadness, but also a real effort by the people here to bring comfort and support to those who've lost loved ones.
Children have a far greater capacity to understand what's in the news than we imagine. I think they have an extraordinary capacity to grasp quite complicated concepts. I'm very surprised at how quickly a child with whom I've co-presented has managed to cotton on to asylum, for example. Not an easy concept, actually, because you're dealing with foreign countries, alien regimes, sort of different kinds of circumstance, and yet they get to grips with it and they ask very potent questions.
Channel 4 broadcaster Jon Snow knows more than most how children respond to the news, having presented a news programme for schools which covered complex issues. The programme featured child co-presenters.
Now, over the summer, one news story has been uppermost in our minds. One scientist has been working on a microchip which can be implanted into a child's arm so they can be tracked if they disappear.
Parents say the tracking device is only to be used in an emergency. Say you're late and they're worried about you. That's okay most of the time, but what if they suspect that you've gone somewhere that they don't approve of, or you're with someone they don't like? Will they be able to resist tracking you down?
It's not yet been decided whether your parents should control the tracker or the police, but whoever has control, I think it's an invasion of privacy and it could lead to a breakdown in trust between you and your parents.
First edition, first of all, went out into the classroom, so it had more of a curriculum kind of feel to it. So there was a certain amount of citizenship and the rest of it woven into some of the topics that we dealt with. But the idea was actually to make accessible current things that were running. It definitely had an educational thrust to it, but still chimed, I think, with what children understood to be news.
With the advent of multi-channel TV, other children's broadcasters like Nickelodeon tried their hand at reinventing news by bringing child presenters even further to the fore.
Last Saturday afternoon here on Electric Avenue, Brixton, South London, a bomb exploded, injuring 39 people, 4 seriously. A minute and a half before the explosion, 14-year-old Gary Shillings picked up the bag and moved it to a less crowded area.
Went out to the Icelands to talk to the manager, and then it went and I went flying into the road with a big nail sticking out my foot. So I was screaming and shouting and pulled it out.
Nick News was really a current affairs show where what we tried to do was give kids the chance to give their perspective on stories that were currently in the news.
Then what happened?
The explosion went off and I went like that. Whoa!
So was it
into
like...
the road.
So it was like really big and you just sort of...
Ended up where the yellow line is on the road. Here.
If you notice a suspect package, it's not a good idea to go near it. Tell an adult, call the police, raise the alarm in any way you can, but don't try and be a hero.
Nick News ran for 3 series. It won 2 BAFTAs, so certainly achieved critical acclaim amongst the television industry, and that's probably because it was a unique programming format, certainly at its time. We chose not to continue it after that 3rd series for 2 main reasons. Trying to create a news show from that entertainment background was actually, was quite difficult. We would need to have access to a news organisation's resource in order to basically use that information to then present it in a way that was specific to Nickelodeon. But it was also to do with the fact that when the BBC got its permission to launch its new children's channels with a very clear education remit, we felt that in order to differentiate our offering from that of the BBC, we should basically focus on our core proposition, which was entertainment.
If commercial companies were obliged to provide news for children, I think that would be great. We would love that, because at the moment we're not challenged, and what we need is really stiff competition to keep us on our toes. What we do at the moment is never stand still, and we have our eye to the future, and we never rest on our laurels.
Though the BBC remains the only broadcaster still committed to children's news, a John Cravenless news round has had to reinvent itself for an interactive age.
Our top stories this afternoon.
I think the programme has changed and evolved a lot over the years, and again that's one thing that's hopefully kept it at the forefront of child viewing.
Now I believe we have Lizo. He is actually there at the site. Lizo, what's happening?
Well, I've been here for the last few hours. As you can see behind me, you can see the train where it smashed into the station front and is now almost wedged underneath there. Local people in the area have all been rallying around and doing their best to help. In the first instance, after the crash happened, there were people coming out, bringing blankets, giving first aid, and now most of the injured, we understand, have now been taken to hospital.
I think there has been a real change on Newsround and on children's news towards having the sorts of presenter that children can identify with rather than that they see as parental figures or teacher-type figures.
But like many adult programmes, Newsround has also taken on board society's ongoing obsession with celebrity culture.
Pouting pop diva Kylie Minogue has split from her boyfriend James Gooding after 2.5 years together. The singer, who's currently in the middle of a UK tour, blames their hectic work schedules for the breakup. Liberty ex-member Kevin Sim is recovering in hospital after injuring himself in a TV tug-of-war match. It's thought he bruised his kidney when he fell onto a pole. Ouch.
You look at children's news programmes that are absolutely wall-to-wall fluffy news stories about celebrities and you think, why are you bothering? If that is a way of infiltrating into that and engaging children's interests in things that actually matter as opposed to the usual chewing gum for the eyes, celebrity nonsense that goes on. If that's a way of introducing other things as well, that's fine.
I grew up, like millions of other people, watching, of course, John Craven's Newsround, and used to have John Craven sitting there, and behind him you had the sort of, whatever day it was written there, presumably in case he forgot, and today is, of course, Wednesday.
More than 30 years after it began, the multi-award-winning programme is watched by more than 2.5 million viewers each day.
A typical Newsround viewer, I suppose, we aim at a child between the 8 and 12, probably focusing on a 10-year-old as somebody who's, probably not obsessively interested in the news, but, just has an interest in what's going on around them.
And despite its popularity with children, 2/3 of the Newsround audience is actually adult.
Should I say this? I think we get more adults watching than watch Newsnight, and possibly breakfast news as well. Lots of adults do watch, and I think for a couple of reasons. One, it's a bonding programme, so if they've got children and they're at home, it's the sort of programme they can sit down together and watch and get equal amounts from it. And also, I think adults just watch casually. They think, Newsround's on, I think I'll catch that. Maybe it'll help explain so-and-so situation to me.
Next to the continuing problems in the Middle East. Last night, 3 weeks of relative calm in the region ended when 16 people were killed by a suicide bomber in the Israeli town of Rishon LeZion near Tel Aviv. Ambulances at yet another suicide bombing in Israel. This time it was mainly teenagers who died. They were playing pool in a local club when the bomber walked in with explosives in a suitcase and blew himself up.
In a more reactive media world where you can watch war and disasters as they happen, Newsround now rarely holds back on what it shows.
We always look for reasons to do a story and to explain it rather than reasons not to. If you think over the past year and a half, we've had the war in Afghanistan, children abducted and killed, September the 11th attacks. Very disturbing stories, and it's only right that Newsround is there to explain it in a way that children can relate to and understand, but also do it in a way that is actually reassuring at the end of the day.
Mum was crying and I was just leaning against the wall watching TV, and it was just horrible because it showed the plane going into the building and then the building blowing up, and there was people jumping out from the windows knowing that they were going to die, and there was lots of people screaming and there was lots of dust and smoke.
Certainly when there's a big traumatic event like September the 11th, they do talk about it. They talk about it in school, they want to talk about it in class. Students wanted to talk about it with us in university. They want to talk about it with their parents.
After the terrorist attacks, a few days later I went to the park to play. There were two girls. They were swearing at my family, and at that point I got really, really angry. I told her, shut up, get lost. And they started saying, go back to your country, you're Muslim, we're not going to leave you. And at that moment, I felt really horrible.
Years ago, such discussions seemed too difficult to handle, but now children expect to express their points of view and to explain how their lives are affected.
I think taking children seriously can never destroy their innocence. This is not going to happen. It makes them feel valued. It makes them feel that they have something to contribute. And the other value of talking to children within their own programme is that it's hopeful. They're usually optimistic. Children's news stories will try to find a way of saying that some good will come out of this. Now, some people would criticise that and say it's softening the news, it's not showing them the full horror. Oh, please, they're only children. You know, you can't expect them to do anything about the full horror. When they're grown up, then that will be their turn.
Well, I think television's blasted the cocoon of childhood anyway. I don't think we could really pretend that we have innocence abroad. I'm, horrified by what my children have seen on television. I'm not a censorious or, Victorian creature myself, but, they have been exposed to material which I absolutely never saw as a visual thing, no, and therefore I'm not sure that the news goes that much further. It only simply says what you're seeing in fiction sometimes has a factual base, and you ought to know a bit more about the factual base from which it springs.
Does anybody watching this programme now feel that they were damaged by having a clear and good explanation of what was going on around the world then? I doubt very much that anybody sitting at home going, yeah, that was me, I'm damaged by Newsround.
We're a long way from the carefully protected world in which children's news once existed. Childhood itself has changed. Children now expect a warts-and-all view of life, and the line between children's and adults' news has blurred to the point of non-existence. It will be some time before we know how this will affect the grown-ups of tomorrow.
When I walked around the streets and that, the kids would walk behind me going da-da-da-da-da, da-dee-da-da-da-dum.
Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Digga-digga-da-ding, digga-digga-da-ding.
Hello again.
That bit, I can't get it in tune, but yeah, fond memories. I always think they should bring that back.